From the far reaches of the Milky Way galaxy, it's Retro Nerd Girl with a film review for you. Today, I'll be reviewing the movie The Last Unicorn, released in 1982. Starring Mia Farrow, Alan Arkin, and Christopher Lee. Directed by Jules Bass and Arthur Rankin Jr. The synopsis is, the last unicorn learns that she is the last of her species in the world and goes on a quest to find out what has happened to the others of her kind. On her travels, she befriends a magician, Schmendrick, in search of true magic, and a woman, Molly Grew, who knows the lay of the land. The story. This film is based on the novel The Last Unicorn, written by Peter S. Beagle in 1968, which sold more than 5 million copies worldwide since its original publication, and has been translated into at least 20 languages. This was such a beloved book when it came out, and it still has so many fans to this day. Early on, Beagle was approached to turn this book into a film, and he was all for it as long as it was animated and he had a say on who produced the film. After reviewing many possibilities, he finally decided to go with Arthur Rankin Jr. and Jules Bass, who directed and produced the film for ITC Entertainment. Peter wrote the film's screenplay to ensure that the book and the film would be closely related, and it truly is. There are minimal changes or omissions, but what was missing from the movie was more time to develop the story for people who had never read the book. The world of The Last Unicorn is a large world with lots of characters set in what appears to be medieval times. Within the story, it utilizes the actual historical lore of the unicorns concerning feminine purity. In European folklore, unicorns were coveted for their horns, being able to neutralize poison and heal the sick. These mythological creatures were usually ensnared because they could only be tamed by virgins. The horns were a treasure to the aristocrats of the time. However, many of the horns were actually the horns of narwhals. In time, the lore of the unicorns has representations with Christ's relationship with the Virgin Mary and virtuous loyalty. In this story, disguised as a children's fantasy, there are wonderfully woven, mature meanings infused into the tale to do with aging, morality, vanity, depression, courage, love, regret, and ultimately the loss of innocence. The tone of the film is a little strange because there's a playful fantasy element to it. But then there are some serious moments where characters actually do die. The pacing. Even with a runtime of 1 hour and 32 minutes, this film is quite slow. But it really pays off by the end to really show you the passage of the sacrifice in the unicorn's journey. There are also lots of little clues along the way to tell you a little bit more about the story. Unfortunately, this takes multiple viewings. For a person who is not familiar with the book, the challenge. The film really seems to own its own strength about the time when King Haggard is introduced on screen, about 50 minutes into the story, and it really ignites it. King Haggard is the ultimate baddie in this film. He is definitely one of the most beautiful villains I have ever seen on screen. He's complex in his villainy, verbally wavering in and out of sanity as he pretty much admits to dispatching the Red Bull in order to gather up all of the unicorns in the world and forcing them into the sea for his own personal pleasure. As he describes it, he once saw the unicorns when he was young, and in order to preserve the feeling of his youth, he hatched this plan to selfishly keep them for himself. Nothing else but watching the unicorns in the waves of the sea gives him any pleasure at all, because it reminds him of his youth. Everything around him is very gray and tattered, very dreary, and it appears in his looks and his clothing. He looks absolutely miserable, and you see how tortured he is as a person, possibly with the guilt of what he's done. He has justified what he's done in his own mind. However, there's something about it that still tortures him. Now, when the last unicorn learns that King Haggard is responsible for sending out the Red Bull, she asks Schmendrick about him. Schmendrick says he is an old man who rules a barren country by the sea. Some say his land was green and soft once before he came, but the minute he touched it, it became hard and gray. So, King Haggard may actually be tortured by some sort of curse that makes everything around him unpleasant. The only thing that his curse can't affect is his ability to love the unicorns as much as he does. Now, second to King Haggard as a challenge in the story is his facilitator, the Red Bull. It's uncertain what or how exactly their connection is to each other, but the film hints that the Red Bull either protects Haggard or keeps him a prisoner. At the end, when the bull is destroyed, so is Haggard's castle, which also is where the bull returns every morning after searching for the unicorns at night. The Red Bull is a beautifully drawn beast physically. He creates a deeper magical mythos for the tale when you see him flaring about in flames in the mist. His role is very important, physically representing fear that our protagonist needs to overcome in order to find a resolution. The carnival witch, Mommy Fortuna, poses as a challenge for a short portion in the film. She is one of my favorite characters in this. And I mean, the bad guys in this movie, wow, okay, but she in particular, she is just a fascinating character, full of color and depth, even though she has a very small role. I mean, oh wow. She captures the last unicorn just when the unicorn is beginning her journey. She captures her and showcases her with other mythological creatures in her carnival show. The problem for Mommy Fortuna is that most of the creatures in the show are actually just average animals that have kind of lost their threatening edge. But she does have two actual, truly mythical creatures, the unicorn and the harpy Seleno. She uses her magic to make the spectators think that the non-mythical creatures are actually exciting, rare beasts. She is kind of overwhelmed and represents the ugliness of ego as she gloats over her magical abilities to capture the unicorn and the harpy because they are real mythical creatures. It all stems from the ridicule that she suffers from other witches. So being able to hold on to real mythological creatures gives her an incredible sense of accomplishment at the price of imprisoning them. You know, that just makes her such an interesting character. And she has too short of a time on screen. And in fact, you know, just All of the villains have very little screen time, but when they interact with the heroes in the film, we really get the most treasures to enjoy in the story. Empathy. The last unicorn is beautiful, but she's detached from everyone else, being the last of her kind, protecting a secret forest. At first, she's a bit cold and even vain, but she reveals a kind of wisdom in her innocence. She would be none the wiser that anything was wrong if she didn't hear two hunters say that this forest held the last unicorn, and even warning her not to leave. She becomes obsessed with finding out what happened to the other unicorns, so she goes on a quest, but just only to find out what happened. She is then captured by the witch Mommy Fortuna and kept as a part of her unique showcase of mythological creatures. Mommy Fortuna gives her a fake horn so people can see her, because not everyone can. It seems that people who are looking for unicorns are the only ones who can see them. It is at this point that she begins to really show that she has compassion as she frees the other animals from their cages while she's trying to escape. She even frees the very dangerous harpy Seleno. In order to save her from the Red Bull, Schmendrick accidentally turns her into a human being and names her Lady Almathea, which is a name from Greek mythology. It's a truly surprising moment in the story for the audience and the characters when she goes through this transformation. Of course, Schmendrick had no choice but to change her to save her life in that particular moment. But I had to wonder why he was ridiculed for changing her into a human. What was so bad about it? And it becomes a little more clear in the story later. They travel to Haggard's castle and meet his adopted son, Prince Lear, who is head over heels for her. It's during this time that you see how the unicorn endures an emotional response to the physical change of being human. Right away, she says that she can feel her new body dying. I thought that was an interesting way of putting it. I mean, she's mortal now and more vulnerable in this physical state. Her transformation extends into her mental state as well. When she first transforms into a woman, she says, "I'm a unicorn," to establish her core identity. Once she spends some time in her new body, she struggles to remember her past and loses her unicorn identity. When she sings, "Now that I'm a woman, everything has changed." It's literal in its meaning. Lady Almathea is forgetting who she is, although her dreams are trying to remind her of who she is. You can see there's a portion of the film where she is singing a song in a fantasy in her head with Prince Lear as she's falling in love with him. And she sees the unicorn run away, just as her memories of who she once was fade away. Another interesting piece to that was when Haggard meets her for the first time, her eyes don't cast a reflection. The only thing you can see in her eyes are her deepest wishes and her drive and motivation, which is going back home to her secret forest. And then later on in the story, when Haggard has this really big confrontation with her, he moves her hair away from her eyes. And this is after she falls in love with Prince Lear. And the pink star that indicated where her horn used to be is gone. Her eyes actually cast a normal reflection now. it's no longer mystical and magical. All of her magical qualities are leaving her. She is now becoming a human woman. And I thought that was so fascinating, and it's such a deep storyline, and I didn't catch it the first time. I had to see this film several times in order to notice these little details. The other protagonist here in the story is Schmendrick, or we call him a sidekick if you want to. He is an amateur magician who saves the unicorn from Mommy Fortuna, and he accompanies her on his quest. Schmendrick's name really means unlucky bungler in Yiddish, which is perfect for him because he does bungle quite a bit. His magical technique is chanting in his spells, "Magic, do what you will." I mean, it doesn't seem to be very specific or thought out. However, his use of magic and quick wit is what saves this group on their travels over and over again. He's on a personal search for his own true magic, but he discovers at the end he's always had it in his ability. And that's a familiar storyline. Now, when he actually gets to the point where he trusts his abilities to work, it works for the very best. And he grows in wisdom during the film to understand that. It's a great character arc, and you really root for him by the end. Along with them is a woman by the name of Molly Grew. Her presence in the film initially perplexed me, but after multiple viewings, I began to understand her character more. Molly meets the unicorn and says, "How dare you come to me now when I am like this? Where were you 10 years ago when I was new?" And the story is using the actual lore of the unicorns to fill in her backstory, which I didn't know at the first viewing or the second viewing. It took me a while. The unicorns are fabled to be attracted to virtuous maidens, and being a maiden and having a unicorn not appear before you would have indicated that you weren't pure and you wouldn't have had the proper choice of husband. And for Molly, it ended up being someone who ran a band of forest dwellers. The unicorns not coming to her in her youth has sent her life in a spiral in which, you know, she's really regretful of or very not happy about. And well, that's one interpretation, and there are a few others out there, including the possibility that Molly may have been Haggard's daughter, and he was depending on her to bring a unicorn to him, and they never did come, so she was cast out of his home. And I think that's really interesting. That's an interesting theory, and it creates a sense of mystery behind her characters. But what we really get from her is what she really represents is the loss of innocence and regret, which is the ultimate theme of the film. And this is probably why it seems that Molly is the one person who understands the last unicorn, is fighting for her, is trying to console her, and translating a lot of what's going on to the audience. Now, the technical aspects of the film. The film was produced by the legendary Rankin Bass, famous for animated productions of The Hobbit, The Return of the King, and The Flight of Dragons, as well as many stop-motion TV movies that are often referred to as claymation. On this project, they hired Japanese studio Topcraft to animate it, and it consists of artists which would later join the famous anime production company Studio Ghibli. You can clearly see the direct Japanese anime influence in this animation, lending a very unique look threading throughout. And this look makes the film stand out among a sea of animated movies. In the opening, there is a wonderful scene gorgeously drawn, paying homage to the unicorn tapestries hung at the cloisters in New York City, bridging actual lore of the real world into the film world. The last unicorn is drawn with a magical, glowing feminine grace that is really difficult to translate in animation. However, they do it wonderfully. The Red Bull was exceptionally designed and animated. Against the last unicorn, the sheer size and physical intimidation enhances the threat he poses in the story. Mommy Fortuna was one of those characters that is so uniquely drawn that you may never forget her. She wears a hat of old wood with a crow perched at the very top. What an interesting design! I especially like the way that her magical incantations were animated. The design and animation for King Haggard was detailed and quite genius in my opinion. I really enjoyed the way it really drove home that look of an aging man driven insane by his own memories. His misery is so deliciously animated in his eyes. I mean, even his clothing design was perfect for his character. I just love the detail in King Haggard's performance and physically, you know, his performance as an animation. It was just wonderful. There are some characters that kids may not even notice or care about, but there is a magical tree and the harpy I mentioned before that had very questionable appearances. However, after watching the film a few times and grasping a better understanding of the world in the story, these oddities are exactly what textures the magical unease the film is setting us up for. Now the backgrounds, the backgrounds were outstanding. I mean, they were just so beautiful and so detailed. There were just these amazing plush green forests, brooks and waterfalls. The wonderful landscapes were just incredibly astounding, no doubt about it. You can see how deep the artists were going into detail, bringing this wonderful fantasy world to life, especially when designing Haggard's castle. It's dark, it's foreboding, and seemed trapped with souls within the walls and the out-facing surface. It just looks so marvelously spooky and tortured. And a citadel of old secrets. Just, I enjoyed it so much. There's a scene at the end of the movie where the trapped unicorns appear as foam within the ocean waves. And for me, it's just amazing to see that fantasy visual. It's just gorgeously imagined, and that part of the film really sends chills up my spine every time I see it. It's just one of those moments that I just can't get out of my head how incredible it is. The score to the film is actually quite special. The main theme song, The Last Unicorn, performed by the popular 1970s band America, was the best song in the movie for me, and most appropriately placed in the movie in the intro and the credits. The soundtrack was actually one of the best-selling albums of 1983 in Germany. Quite interesting. The performances. The unicorn was well played by Mia Farrow. The unicorn is a complex character and she plays it excellently. There's a fragility in her voice that conveys the unicorn's innocence in the world. And I think that they even tried to make the character look like her too. Alan Arkin plays Schmendrick and puts in a great performance, playing it rather naturally, and I think that as a fantasy film, we really needed that kind of performance to keep it grounded. To me, one of the best performances was from Christopher Lee, who supplied the voice of King Haggard. Oh my God. You know, he was so good in that. He loved the book so much that he showed up on the first day of the recording sessions with his own copy of the book with several things that he insisted be included in the story. He said that The Last Unicorn was one of his favorite movies, and he was so dedicated to the project that he also provides King Haggard's voice in the German version of the movie as well. When you just listen to his vocal performance, you can feel the emotional depth that he conveys about his character, and it's powerful. I mean, you understand him although he's a villain, and that's what's so captivating about it. Angela Lansbury provides the voice of Mommy Fortuna, a highly memorable character who has a very short time on screen. But her lines are so often quoted whenever this movie is discussed. She alters her voice slightly for the role, but what you hear is the determination of the character, and she plays on every word with her soul. I just loved her passionate performance. The best part of the film. The best part of the film for me is the fantasy. It's an interesting tale with lots of mystery, with endless possibilities for imagining the world within. My wish list. You know, I wish some of the lore of the unicorns, their ways, were explained more in the film. I had to do a lot of research in order to understand what was happening in the story based on the lore of the unicorns. It's hard to understand all of the nuances in the film if you haven't read the book. The ending. The ending was really good. You have a sense that the unicorn has undergone a character arc in a major way, and she is a better being for it, even becoming a hero by facing the Red Bull and freeing her fellow unicorns. Having been a human woman and fallen in love, she can neither go back to being with the other unicorns or fit into the human world either. I love the fact that it's not the kind of happy ending that puts Almathea with the prince at the end. As well, Molly Groot is not explicitly a love interest for Schmendrick. They are friends that care for one another, and it's mostly assumed that they would be together at the end. I like that. My enjoyment. If I saw this film when I was a child, I suppose I could have had some special affinity to this film, as so many people who had seen it in their childhoods have. And after seeing this for the first time, I was completely confused about what I had just endured. I thought it was an okay movie, but I didn't understand it, and there were certain things I just didn't care for. Now, I got the opportunity to see the film again and get a great inside explanation from the book, and it really changed my outlook, and that totally surprised me. So the biggest caveat for really enjoying this movie is to first read the book or be knowledgeable about the contents of the book. The other is to see this movie as a child, because it plays right into the a child's sense of wonder and imagination and fantasy, but the deeper aspects are quite innocuous until you examine it later with mature eyes. This film has such a dedicated following, and I can clearly see how this film has influenced so many other movies, or at least coincidentally have some interesting reflections. The movie legend is often compared to this film. The use of unicorns and the red skin horn darkness resembling the Red Bull are a few similarities that come to mind. The Dark Crystal has many similarities too. The Harpy and the Skeksis look quite similar. And a lot of the fantasy element in the labyrinth reminds you quite a bit of this movie, doesn't it? There's a lot about this movie that is just flat out amazing to me, and I can totally geek out about the simply gorgeous animation, but the film did get the waterfall of tears out of me at the end credits when the unicorn sees her home and races off to it. It is absolutely heartwarming and utterly broke me. At that point, you could really replay the movie from the beginning, and it really feels like a seamless story loop. What a wonderful tale, deeper than I expected to get from an animated film. The story had a lot of merit, worthy of its cult following. My rating is an 8.8. Well, that sums up my review. I hoped you liked it. It's Retro Nerd Girls signing off. Take care, movie lovers. I'm off to my next review.